Good morning.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. How are you?
I am well. And you?
I am well. Thank you. Things are going well here ever since we met with you. Things are going really well.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Glad I could help.
Yeah. Yeah. Things are going really well. We're kind of getting really close.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What are you doing Labor Day? Are you in town?
Should be.
Okay. I didn't say anything.
That would be quick. Let's see. Labor Day is going to be September 5th.
And when are the holidays? When's Rosh Hashanah? And don't say first of Tishrei.
Right. I think Rosh Hashanah is later in
Okay, yeah, I think so too.
because we have a Dar Bet.
Right. Okay, good.
That's pushing us in. So Rosh Hashanah is actually starts Sunday night, the 25th.
Okay, good. So we have plenty of time.
Saturday night, the 18th or the 17th is Slichot.
Okay.
And then I think the 11th or something is a wedding I'm doing. I'm not sure. Is it 10th or something? Yeah. The 10th is Bobby Rubin's son and future daughter-in-law. Their wedding is then.
You said September 10th?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But you're thinking of like the Sunday of Labor Day weekend or Labor Day.
Well, we're not ready to talk. We're not ready to talk on that.
No.
Probably Sunday or even Saturday night-ish.
Sure.
But,
all right, well, you'll let me know.
We will. There's no announcement yet.
No, I know.
But I'm thinking ahead.
Okay.
Hi, Brad. How are you?
Brad and Luba's coming on.
Oh, good. Are we going to do a service or are we going to do it like we did last week?
We'll see what the group wants to do. I'm open.
I really enjoyed last week.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I do have another question.
Yeah.
Hi, Luba.
Hello.
We
How
missed
are you,
you last
Luba?
week. You okay, Luba?
Yes, I'm okay.
Good.
Trying to set up. Whew.
Your camera is very clear today, Luba.
I don't know. It was lately like in a shady.
No, right now it's very clear.
Yeah, it is good.
Yeah, you never quite know what's going to happen with this stuff.
Yeah, it is strange. Sometimes very strange things happen.
Yeah. Strange things done by the midnight sun, by the men toil for gold. But the strangest thing I ever did see was the cremation of Sam Mcgee. Now, Sam Mcgee was from Tennessee, where the sun blooms warm and boils. I can go on for 15 minutes, but you know. Ever heard that? It's a Robert Severus poem called The Cremation of Sam Mcgee. We had to learn it in school.
You had to learn in school? In
Yeah.
American school?
No, Canadian.
Oh.
He's a Canadian author.
Mm.
So in Canadian schools, they learned, we learned Canadian authors, right? And there's not that many of them. So you end up, so it ends up everybody learns the same stuff.
Yeah, strange thing, but Canadian education considered one of the best education in the world, among the best education in the
It
world.
was great. I mean, the public education is outstanding.
And I can quote you Robert Frost's cover to cover, 7 or 8 of them, because We had to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Robert Frost is sort of the American version. And then we had to do Margaret Lawrence, Margaret Atwood, Mordecai Richler. Those are the sort of bigger name authors. Robertson Davies. Seems like a very long time ago.
Yeah.
Your mom isn't joining us this morning.
I don't know. Maybe she's got a golf game. What do I know? You know, mom's living it up.
Nice.
We're going down in a couple of weeks. Yeah, she calls to complain about the weather. Oh, it's only 60 degrees. I'm like, really?
She feel warm every time she go in shorts and sleeveless.
Yeah, well, you know.
Got a half minion.
There we go.
Craig's coming. He's just getting dressed.
We'd prefer that.
So would he.
There are reasons my video's off.
Uh-huh.
Ah.
And that's a joke.
I know.
Oh, and there are so many stories of, you know, people working from home and spouses walking in the background and or out of the shower and or children drifting in the background or you know.
Yeah.
I saw this one where she was making some very formal, very important business, whatever presentation, and her dog is pooping it right behind her in the background. You know. The things we never thought we would do.
True.
Yeah, I wasn't sure I was going to be able to log on because I had to shovel out my mailbox and my walk this morning. My mailbox was, you couldn't see it. There were 2 feet of snow above the top of it and about 3 feet of snow in front of it. So if I want to get mail, I had to dig the whole thing out.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. It's no fun.
And my video's off until I stop schwitzing.
This we also appreciate. Yeah. So Pam, on the 18th, Jesse is away, and I have my friends Sue and Mark joining us.
Oh, nice. February 18th?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yael was busy, and Deborah was busy, and anyway, so
Okay.
it's nice to have a change anyway, so that's good.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I liked the cantor last night. Was that what was the synagogue? That was the big one that you always
Central Synagogue.
say again?
Central Synagogue.
That's right. That was lovely.
Yeah, she's great. She's actually married to the music director there, which is really kind of funny.
Are they friends of yours?
No, not really. She's much younger. Yeah, and the cantors I tend to know are sort of the ones I went to school with, kind of thing, or the ones I've worked with over the years, but
Right.
mostly.
There he is.
Shabbat shalom. Well, why don't we jump in? So last week we kind of perused our way through questions of tefillah. People seem to enjoy that. If that's something you think to do again this week, rather than a formal service, we could do that. What's your pleasure, as it were?
I'd like
What
to.
do you decide?
I like what we did last week. I already have a question.
Okay.
All right, and I've heard different answers. I mean, is that what we're gonna do? We're gonna.
Yeah, that's fine.
I've heard a couple of different answers, but I want to hear your answer. The second line of the Shema is supposed to be said
Hold on.
softer or not at all.
Hold on. Let's give everybody a page so that they can look at it. It's actually page 114 in the black or 232 in the blue.
So traditionally, the second line is either softer or not at all. I've heard different reasons, but I want to hear another reason. Or what's your answer?
Well, the most direct answer is that the Shema and the V'ahavta that follows is actually part of the Torah text.
Right.
So the first line of the Shema, the Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. There's Sue and Eric. That line is directly followed by V'ahavta et Elohecha in the Torah. The rabbis, when they created the liturgy, inserted kind of this affirmation line. So, the Shema says, listen, Israel, Shema Yisrael, listen, pay attention, understand, absorb, kind of listen, Israel. Adonai is our God. Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. God is the only. Right? And most in most kind of biblical, poetic, or liturgical settings, there's always this response, right? So there's this Baruch Hu, which is the first and the second call and response. There's whatever. So what they did is they inserted this line, which is Baruch Shem Kavod. Blessed is the name. Well, blessed be God's name. But kavod, so honor. Malchuto in God's kingdom. Le'olam va'ed, forever and ever. Okay, or doesn't have to necessarily be God's kingdom, but God's rule, God's reign, God's control, etc.
Okay.
All those are synonyms, right? So the tradition evolved that you might say the Shema out loud, the first line, but that the second line was said silently, so as not to necessarily give people the indication that it was of the same level of text. Right? Because you have a hierarchy of text in Jewish life. So the closer you get to Torah or Torah itself, the more authentic or the more authoritative the text is. Right? So if you are trying to prove a halachic point and you can get to a Torah text, then that's gold, right? That's your highest level of being able to prove something is true, right? So if you want to prove Shabbat and you can prove it through Torah, boom, you're solid. The further you go in the biblical canon, the less authoritative the texts become. And so in this case, what they like, at least stylistically, what they wanted to do is make sure that people didn't think that this was part of Torah itself, that this was clearly an addition, and this was clearly something that was said to oneself.
But I was just going to say, I've heard what I thought was them trying to prove that it was from Torah and saying that this was Jacob's son's response after he gave some blessing or other. What's the story on that?
That this is
from Torah, that this line.
but it's not contiguous.
Okay.
It's I think it's from I mean, it's not actually from Torah.
That Midrash?
Maybe it's Midrash.
Actually, there's a note here. Here we go. It's from Talmud, Yoma 3:8, and inspired by Nehemiah 9:5. So if you were to look up Nehemiah 9:5, we might be able to figure that out, but which we can do.
Well, thank you.
Let's see. Safaria. Texts. Tanakh.
Yeah, that's right.
Hi, Susan. Hi, Eric.
Good morning. Eric's not here, but I am. He'll join us later.
Okay.
Time to get up earlier.
Yeah, right.
Sue, do you know what's going on? We are doing service study. We have Torah study. We're doing service study instead of having a service.
I love it.
We did it last week. It was really informative.
I know I missed last week and I'm going to watch it on YouTube, which will be nice.
It's actually my crafty way of not having to sing to you all. Okay, so here we have Nehemiah 9:5.
Is this Torah? What is this?
So
Talmud.
this is from Nehemiah, so it's one of the later books of the biblical canon. And this is the Levites. Yeshua Kadmil Banaich said, Kumu Barchu et Adonai Elohechem min haolam ad haolam, which is close to Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Ba'ed, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the world of inspired by, let's say, I mean, I think claiming it is a bit of a stretch, but that's me.
Close. It is close enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly close. It's certainly close. And the liturgist, remember that, in the early days, and in the Talmudic times, remember the prayer book is formulated somewhere after the first or second centuries, right? And goes through a long period of flex and growth and evolution. So in fact, it continues to evolve and change almost in a fluid way until the evolution of the printing press. It was not actually until the printing press is created that you have people in the pew actually having prayer books in their hands for the most part, which certainly changes the dynamic, because if you don't have a prayer book in your hands, the person leading the prayer can feel much freer to extemporize. And as we get closer to that printing press timeline, the prayers tend to get more and more fixed as books begin to be more and more desired by individuals, which is of course what spurs the invention of the press in the first place. And interestingly enough, if you're interested, we could set this up. It might be really interesting. One of my colleagues in Ottawa runs the Lowry book collection, which is a rare Judaica collection, and has copies of the Gutenberg Bible and first edition of Talmud, and I mean one of the most amazing book collections ever. And we might be able to do a tour with him or something. He's done those Zoom tours kind of things. It's really interesting.
Nice.
So we might think about doing that. Anyway, so the evolution is such that this is sort of adapted, right? So sometimes texts are taken, whole, as we have the first line, and then the V'ahavta and the other paragraphs of the Shema, which are taken wholesale out of the Torah. This one seems to be an adaptation of a much later text, and so stylistically and sort of the way in which it's put together, they said, look, let's just say that a little bit quieter. Theologically, I think that there's also another intent to it, because it allows us to make this statement that's communal, and then right, so you have this big communal statement, Shema Yisrael, and then you have this very personal moment of Baruch Shem Kavod, blessed be God's name forever and ever. And that sort of dynamic, that group moment and personal moment is, and then you move into V'ahavta, which is, what does that mean? And how does it work? What does it mean to that God is our God? And then you go through the whole, how do you love God, and how do you think about God, and how do you put that into practice? If we look at the traditional formulation of the Shema, which is not here, but some of it is, it has three different paragraphs. Actually, when they were editing this text, the initial thought was to include all three paragraphs of the traditional Shema. So the first one is the V'ahavta. The second one is V'haya im Shemoah, which is really problematic if you are not a believer in the quid pro quo version of God, because it says, if I listen to what God tells me to do, then I'll live happily ever after. I paraphrase. But that may or may not be accurate, right? I mean, we know full well that not all those who follow and observe are ones who live life of ease. In fact, sometimes quite the opposite. So we have that paragraph, which was more or less cut out. And then we have this paragraph, and you can take a look at it on page 118, which is the commandments regarding tzitzit.
So is that the top of 118? Is that considered part of the Via Hafta?
Right. So the Via Hafta actually is all three of these paragraphs, right?
Okay.
So it's the one that starts Via Hafta, V'haya im shamoa, and then following is Vayomer, sort of the way they're referred to. And all three of those comprise Via Hafta, and they come from different sections of text. Right. So the first one, Via Hafta, comes from Deuteronomy 6:5.
Right.
The Haya'im Shamoa, I don't remember, and it's not here, so I can't tell you. But if you have a traditional prayer book, it'll be there.
Right.
And then, Vayomer comes from Numbers 15.
Okay.
Right. So you have, if you take a look at the Shema, which is that whole rubric, right? Starting with Shema Yisrael and ending with the end of Via Hafta, it's sort of this patchwork that's pulled together from different places in Torah, but it's woven together as this complete whole. And when we use it, we see it as this is contiguous, right? We don't necessarily see it as now. I mean, understand that the rabbis are using hypertext theory here. Long before anybody knew about little blue lines that are underlined, they had hypertext in their brain. And by that, I mean that they always worked on the sense of the assumption that you already had memorized the entire Torah. So that when references were made, they could safely assume that you would get what we were talking about. And you would get the connection. So, for instance, Mi Chamocha is the perfect example. Mi Chamocha means nothing. How fabulous are you, O God? Except when you put it into its context of having just crossed over the Sea of Reeds, having had the sea split, the Israelites go across, the Egyptians follow, God kills the Egyptians and saves the Jews, and we live happily ever after. And that becomes the quintessential moment of God's redemption. Now, if you don't have that tape playing in the background, then that prayer doesn't necessarily have the same impact. And so, sometimes, and the prayer book is a very layered kind of document, right? Because there are simple meanings, and they're beautiful poetry and prayer, and you can take meaning from it. And then you get to the next level of, well, where does this text come from, and what's the context of that story, and how does it impact on how do I understand the actual prayer?
So before you run too far away from Mi Chamocha, why is it Mi Chamocha first line and Mi Kamocha second line, but the English translates out the same?
So the story goes that, and this is page 122.
Sorry to interrupt your Shema stuff, Pam, but that's always happened to me.
Hold on. Are we done with the Shema? We can.
Well, one last thing about the Shema. As far as our congregants, I mean, most of them don't say the second line soft or silent. Do we want to?
Right. Okay. So that was the history. Now, when the Reform movement elevated the Shema from its place as a prayer leading up to the pinnacle of the service, which was the Amidah, and shifted things so that the Shema became kind of the big moment in prayer, then it became this dramatic experience of saying both lines out loud and prominently, right? So it was sung. I mean, in the old days, you knew when a prayer was important if the rabbi read it in English, read it in Hebrew, and then you sang it in Hebrew. That's how you knew. If you didn't do all three,
Yeah.
But it's and you know, if you've ever if you ever grew up in one of these classic Reform places, the rabbi would make this big deal out of it, and we join together now in the watchword of our faith, Shema Yisrael. It was a thing, sometimes I sort of miss that sort of wear a robe, create the smoke and mirrors drama piece, but yeah. We actually, when I was in Rochester, we had a group of people who were part of the like the seniors group in the temple, and they were lamenting the loss of the Union Prayer Book, the little black book. And so Elizabeth Schwartz, who was 90 something years old at the time and had been the director of education at the synagogue in the 20s or 30s or something ridiculous, was sort of leading this group. And so we said, fine, we'll lead a Union Prayer Book service, and we'll have lunch after, and we'll have a conversation, and we'll talk about it. So we found the music, and we found, whatever, and we did the whole thing. So sure enough, lunch comes, Elizabeth stands up and she says, that was a lovely service in 1952. Today, fat.
Wow.
That was it.
Wow.
So, I think things have changed, and in some congregations, this line is said quietly. In some congregations, it's said out loud. I mean, it's all over the place.
Okay.
So.
Well, thank you. That was interesting.
Yeah.
And the golf game is over.
That's Mi Chamocha question. So, Mi Chamocha, page 122 or 240, depending on. Oh, did you bring a note?
No, sorry.
How was your golf score, Mom?
No golf. I went on a tour of Jewish Berlin. It was fascinating. It was a webinar. It wasn't live.
Oh, you mean you didn't really go?
What? It was so interesting. Oh my God.
Okay. Anyway.
What page? 240?
240.
Okay.
In the blue.
Yeah.
Okay. So the question is, why is it Mi Chamocha Bailim Adonai Mi Kamocha Nedar Bakodesh? So the story goes that Nachshon is the first into the water. The water's not separating, and Nachshon is the first to put his toes in the water. And as he is walking into the water, he is singing, Mi Chamocha Bailim Adonai, Mi Chamocha Nedar Bakodesh. And he keeps going in, and the water keeps rising, and he keeps rising, and suddenly the water comes in, and he's singing, and suddenly the water comes into his mouth, and he coughs, and he says, "Mi kamocha bailim Adonai," and that's why.
Okay.
Okay.
Or there is, I'm trying to remember what the grammatical term is, but
So yeah, the first one is chaf.
there's a grammatical reason that the dagesh appears in the kaf in the second line and not the first line, and I can't remember the term. I can look it up.
It's the same word and it's the same meaning. It's just different.
Yes.
Okie dokie. Yeah, I always sing it wrong because I forget that it's a ka, and then I hear Jesse. I'm like, oh yeah, duh.
Right. It has to do with its placement. It has to do with. I believe it may be a pausal form, which then moves the accent, and then you get the dagesh, which makes it a kaf instead of a chaf.
There's also a dash after the me and not after on the second line.
Maybe.
Well, me on the first line, dash, kamocha. And the second one is me, no dash, kamocha.
So it may be that the first one, yeah, okay, here it is. Okay, so it's called smichut, which
Yeah.
means connected, right?
Right.
So the first one is in smichut form, which means those two words are a single phrase. When they're in a, thank you for reminding me, Mom. When words are in phrase form, called smichut, which means that they're close to each other, they're actually considered one continuous word. So any word that would have a dagesh at the beginning of the word loses the dagesh at the beginning of the word, making it mi chamocha, versus the second time, they're independent two words, mi kamocha, which is the way that it's supposed to be, because the kaf at the beginning of a word would always have a dagesh. But in this case, it's not in smichut. It's not in that phrase form, and so therefore it maintains or holds on to its dagesh.
And to make it even stranger, it's directly from Exodus 15:11, where there were no vowels or any of the dots or any of the other stuff.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so that's the other complication, right? Is that Torah and biblical text is like those biology textbooks we had in high school, where you had a picture of the bones and then you flipped the acetate sheet over and you had the muscle sets, the muscle system and the circulatory system and the whatever. And Torah works the same way, right? We've got the letters only, the consonants only, and then you put the cantillation marks first, actually, and then later the vowels, and then later you put the puzzle for the chapters and the verses. The chapters and the verses actually are more of a Christian invention that derived from, well, it came in more than two, but it came in basically two versions. One was the chapter and verses all derived from the Hebrew definition of the end of a line, which is the sof pasuk, which is so in Torah you'll see the end of a line is also the end of where the rabbis thought it should end in terms of singing it. And so you had this puzzle form that, or the not the puzzle form, but when the Christian scholars came and created the chapter and verse system, they took those puzzle end of line segments and said each one of those is a verse. And then they split up the chapters a little bit differently and whatever. So, and we've adopted that system. Because prior to that, all we referred to sections were by Parsha. So we would say, at the beginning of Parshat Bereshit, it was far less, we didn't have this chapter and verse thing. That comes, fairly recently. Because if you look at classic commentaries, the classic commentaries never reference chapter and verse. They give you the first 2 or 3 words of a line. And because you already memorized the entire Torah, you know what they're talking about. Again, it's the hypertext piece.
I have one last question about the difference between the two phrases. In the first Mi Kamocha, they have under the Mayim or the Nem, the 2 dots, I don't know the name of it. I think of it as a glottal stop. Does that come into the pronunciation? It's the 2 vertical dots.
On mine, it's a straight line.
Yeah, it's a meteg. It should be a straight line. It shouldn't be a dot.
Oh, okay. So it's a straight line. So what does the straight line do?
It's telling you that that's where the cantillation marks are.
Got it. Okay.
That's where So it's me chamocha, and that's where the accent is on the letter there.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mostly Hebrew is accented on the first syllable, right? So it's, Ba'elim, Adonai, Nedar, Bakodesh, right? Versus, and if I was, which is, and if we were accenting the last syllable, it would be more like Ba'elim, Nedar, that kind of thing. So it's always hard to do because but in sometimes the accents move around based on the forms. Okay.
I have a question about something you said last week. You're talking about the.
That's not fair. I don't remember.
Yeah, well, you're talking about the Aleinu, and you said the early reformers did a whole rewrite of that. And to what end? What was their purpose in doing that?
So remember that Isaac Mayer Wise in the 1860s, 1850s, 1860s, has this idea that he's going to create, this was his ultimate plan. He's going to create the first indigenous American religion. I know. Let's leave aside the whole First Peoples, First Nations, question totally, because it's absurd. But his idea was that rather than have these faiths that were imported from Europe, right, Catholicism, Lutheran, Judaism, etc., he decides that he thinks America needs its own indigenous faith and that it should be based on the tenets of the biblical text and based on the ideas of rationalism and morality. He more or less gives up quickly on that and decides that he wants to recreate Judaism, at least in that image. And so he's actually in Albany when he's trying to think about this stuff and realizes that there's no way that he can do this anywhere in a place where there is basically an established Jewish community. He needs to go to a place that'll give him the freedom to do basically whatever he wants and to be the authority there to do it. He doesn't want to have to answer to the established Orthodox communities and everything else. So he packs himself off to what is supposed to become the next New York in the US, the biggest growing city in the country, the city that sits at the crossroads of two epic highways, the rivers, and he goes to Cincinnati. And Cincinnati in the 1860s was the place to be. It was the fastest growing city. It was the most industrialized city. It was slated to, and it was in the center, more or less. Well, at that time, it was really in the center because we don't go west yet, right? And so it really is seen as what's going to become the most sophisticated city in the country. It doesn't quite happen, but and if you've ever been to Cincinnati, it really doesn't happen. But the what it does do is it allows him to be completely free. So he starts by building Plum Street Temple. Well, he starts by having this community. He builds Plum Street Temple in the 1860s. Actually, it starts actually before the Civil War and is finished just after the Civil War because it's such a big endeavor. and he starts practicing or talking about a brand of Judaism that is radically different, that picks up on the radical reform of Germany in the 1830s and 40s and moves it even further to the left. And so the idea initially was to eliminate from our liturgy particularistic texts. And the Aleinu was significantly particularistic. And so they rewrite it to be this universal sort of message. That's a long answer to that simple question.
What does particularistic mean?
I'm the best and it's all about me.
What Eric whispered in my ear, it was interesting to hear you recount the history, or this Wise had this idea that I need to get away and found this original religion. And he was coming from upstate New York. And in the 1820s, it was Joseph Smith who was running to Utah to found this particular religion. And it was in the air, I think, at that time.
Running off from upstate New York.
Yes, in the Holy Land of Rochester, New York. And sure enough, in Palmyra, New York, which is just outside Rochester, that is where Joseph Smith is supposed to have found the Mormon Testament.
Golden plates, the Book of Mormon.
It's also not far from Seneca Falls, where America's feminists decide.
And where Frederick Douglass, begins the whole freedom movement and the abolitionist movement. I mean, Rochester has amazing sort of crossroad moments in history.
When did Chautauqua open up?
Yeah, I mean, if you ever, whatever, you're passing through Rochester, the Mount Hope Cemetery has Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony, and I always actually was amused driving to the Jewish section. You pass by some of the older sort of mausoleum sections, and you pass by Bausch and Blum.
Right.
Wow.
Kodak is actually buried in the lobby of the building.
Wow.
The Kodak building, under the fountain. Yeah, in the lobby.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Like the royalty in the church.
Well, and actually, it created enormous conflict for some of the Jewish community members, because if you're a Kohen, you can't be in the presence of a dead body. So you had to, it was this whole thing about how do you get into the building, But Kodak was a very challenging place for Jews to work for many, many years. And then you had Xerox there, right? So believe it or not, Harold, blanking on his name. I don't know.
I think of Stetner's part of the Xerox, or
Anyway, Harold, I forgot his last name, was the chief engineer on designing probably the single the single invention that changed every single person's life on the planet. Any idea what that was?
the
I thought
minute.
that was it.
The Xerox machine.
Oh, the Xerox machine.
Harold Burlov was one of the chief engineers on the creation of the first Xerox machine. Then called out, it was before it was Xerox, but whatever it was. Yeah.
The
Anyway.
Gestetner was the copy machine. They were a Jewish family, I think from Hungary, I believe.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, so yeah, there was something in the air there, in that area, that created this opportunity for people to create and think differently. because it all happens relatively and in the same period of time. I mean, if you think about the abolitionist movement, the women's rights movements, the creation of the more some of the liberal and different ways of thinking religiously are there. You know, you've got a lot going on for no particular reason. Like there's no, it's
Right,
not.
John Brown is also sort of a religious fanatic with a house about halfway between Erie and Meadville.
Right, you've got Harriet Tubman,
Right.
who's there, you know, yeah. So there's lots
Well,
going.
it's just fascinating to put Reform Judaism in the middle of that era.
Right, because you know, and really, he was taking a page out of German Reform, but he clearly understood that it had to have its own presentation as an American experience.
Which it still does in so many ways, right? You know, Reform
Yes.
Judaism, like if you go to France and you go to Israel and you're either Jewish or you're not, but you know, or you're Orthodox, but you're not Reformist.
Well, a lot of places have you know, experience or have liberal Judaism. I mean, liberal Judaism is thriving in Eastern Europe and all over, you know, Western Europe these days and whatever, but it certainly is different than it is here in the US, right? Here in the US, it's the absolute dominant religious stream. So Carly, you have to jump in. I can't. So Carly says, I thought something about.
I thought I'd read somewhere that the first official Reform congregation in the U.S. was in South Carolina.
AKBE.
Certainly not the first official Reform, because that's in Plum Street Temple in Cincinnati, Ohio. But
I'll try to see where I read that. I know it was a book I have by Dana Kaplan.
I mean, they've got. I mean,
I'll try to see if
Charleston has. I think one of the oldest synagogues for sure.
Okay, maybe that's what it was. I'll try to find it.
I know it's between Charleston and Rhode Island. I'm not sure which one is the older.
On this tour of Berlin, they said that Berlin has the largest Jewish community in Europe, which is astounding.
Has or had?
Has. Present.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I couldn't believe it.
Well,
They talked about the Reform movement in Berlin and about Leo Back and all of that. It was really.
Yeah. The German Jewish population has grown significantly, mostly due to immigration from Eastern Europe.
Russia, yeah.
When the Russian Jews could leave, a lot of them went to Israel, a lot of them went here, a lot of them whatever, but a lot of them went to Germany. It's sort of ironic, I think. But
He mentioned that on his trip. He said it's hard to believe, you know.
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
No, I was just going to ask back to the thing about is Reform, whatever the way to put it, the practice of Reform Judaism in Europe that different than in the US, or is it just other aspects?
The practice itself is more or less the same. It's far less. It's much more traditional. First of all, I think you'll find that the European and Israeli Reform communities are much more traditional and much more tied to a traditional approach to Judaism. Period. So they don't recognize patrilineal descent. Is a big one. And the services are generally more in Hebrew than they are in the language of whatever country they're coming from. But that is also the case in Canada, right? So the Canadian Reform version is far more traditional than you would find here. I mean, we're already, in terms of Anshe Chesed, we're kind of more or less on the right side of the traditional experience, right? If you were to go to, a Reform synagogue in Selma, Alabama, right? You would not have nearly the amount of Hebrew nor the sort of traditional practice that we have in our service. It seems that the further north you go, at least in North America, the more traditional services are. Exempting immigration cities, Atlanta, Florida, places that people came from different, people that the population essentially is not really from there. Right. I mean, Atlanta is in the South, but it's not really so South. Well, I mean, Pan can talk to that more than I
You're
can.
absolutely right. Lots and lots of Northerners.
Yankees.
Yankees.
Yeah, but it just changes the dynamics, right? I mean, versus a place like Birmingham, Alabama,
Right.
which is, generationally South. And, the synagogue there is an expression of that.
When does Reconstructionist Judaism come in, and why?
Okay, so, and by the way, they changed their name. Did you know that?
Oh,
No, what is it now?
what is it?
They're now reconstructing Judaism. No.
Going,
No, that's their name.
really?
They changed the name. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the history is that you have by the 18 Isaac Mayer Wise establishes Plum Street Temple in the 1860s. He builds it in the early 1870s. He establishes the Union for American Hebrew Congregations. Then they established Hebrew Union College in 1875. Okay. And they're part of a large movement of Jews all around the country who are saying Orthodox Judaism is just no longer answering our needs. They meet several times, and there's a guy called Sabato Marias, who happens to be my grandfather's great-great-uncle, who comes to a meeting and says, line in the sand, you've gone too far. You have abrogated any sense or connection to traditional adherence to halacha and Jewish legal process, and we think you've just gone too far. So we're going to go over here and we're going to create something else. And he goes off to New York and he creates the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, which then spawns into becoming the conservative movement. But that doesn't happen. That happens much later. I forgot the dates around that, but it's much, much later. And then even later, the Orthodox community kind of comes together and says, well, if these other two are having national movements, we need a national movement too. And so they found the OU, the Orthodox Union. And they all have that same sense of unity and union in their names, right? United Synagogue of America, Union of American Hebrew Congregations, Orthodox Union. I mean, this is the time period, right? This is the creation of unions, the creation of federation, the creation of fraternal orders and that kind of thing. It's all happening in that context. And then Reconstructionist Judaism happens much, much later. Actually, Mordechai Kaplan, who is on faculty at the Jewish Theological Seminary in the 1930s and 40s, begins writing and kind of throwing out this idea that Judaism is far less a religion and far more a sense of a peoplehood. And he calls it a civilization.
He was raised Orthodox too, wasn't he?
Yeah, I'm not
Kaplan?
sure exactly what his what he was raised, but most of them were. I mean,
It's just interesting that somebody from like that background would kind of go that way.
There was
Yeah,
only
well, and
Orthodox at the beginning. There wasn't any division. It was just Orthodox. That's it.
sort of.
Yeah.
I mean, well, there was, but there was, whether you fully participated or not was another question.
Right.
Right. And then you had conflicts between what kind of Orthodox, right? There was Hasidic and Misnagdim and Litvak and Glitzianer, and all of these had different sort of ideas of how Judaism should be practiced, right? So it's, the fallacy that we came up in the 19th and 20th century with these divisions in Jewish life is wrong, because if you go all the way back, you had the tribal designations, and then you had the different designations in the temple period of the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Essenes, the Zealots, and all of that, which had very different opinions of how Judaism should be practiced. The kind of fantasy, Fiddler on the Roof, that everybody was celebrating Shabbos together and everybody was observing and everybody was literate and everybody knew everything and all that, it just isn't operative. It just never was. And in fact, while people are let's say, bemoaning the assimilationist experience of Judaism in the United States, I think we have, by and large, a much more informed Jewish community about Judaism and Hebrew than we had a generation or two generations ago. The idea that a group of people would come together on a Saturday morning and study biblical text didn't happen until the 70s and 80s. I mean, that's contemporary. I mean, there is no reform version or there was no Torah text in the pew until the 80s. I mean, think about it. It just didn't happen. I mean, not that people didn't join together on Saturday morning for Torah study. It wasn't a thing. That happens much, much later.
We had
And-
religious school on Saturdays.
Well,
Saturday morning.
that actually was by design. The idea was that we should celebrate Shabbat, and part of Shabbat is learning, and so they did. Many places did religious school on Shabbat so that they could get kids to celebrate Shabbat. Rather than the traditional, Sunday school model, right? And I mean, Holy Blossom had school on Sundays for decades and
Decades. I had it, you had it.
I mean, they only switched over to Sundays, I think, in the last 10 years, 15 years, something like that. So pretty contemporary. All right. Any last thoughts?
Oh, that was interesting.
That's great.
Real quick, Rabbi, I found what I was referencing.
Okay. You
I
got it.
have American Reform Judaism by Dana Kaplan, which is really good.
Yeah.
And it was talking about the first attempt at reform occurred in Charleston, South Carolina in 1824. 47 members got together.
The Society for Israelites or something.
Yeah, the Reform Society of Israelites. And then it goes on to say that they disbanded in 33 for various reasons. And that it says even in the text it was considered like an isolated phenomenon. That part I didn't remember because it said here that I guess Isaac Wise didn't immigrate to the U.S. until 1846. So it was like a little over 20 years later. But
I'm going to mute Andy while he cleans the countertop.
It's all like cat hair.
Yeah. So what happens actually, now that you remind me of the story, is that group of people essentially takes, contiguous with what's going on in Europe and tries to bring it to the United States, and is completely shut down. And Isaac Mayer Wise actually learns from that and says, he can't do it from within a place that's already established. He's got to go to some place that really is without, that's just clean. And then he's able to create and also Cincinnati is in a different geographic location with different proximity to East Coast and whatever than Charleston was. So that helped.
Yeah, I just remember reading that, thinking of all places, Charleston, South Carolina. I don't know. My experience of living down south is it's not always the most accepting place in certain areas of like faiths outside of Christianity. But I mean, I
don't know. I think they have a long history of being accepting and open, and except for that whole slavery thing.
Yeah,
There's the whole Ku Klux Klan thing down there.
Well, that's actually the least of our worries.
I know now, but years ago when I visited that synagogue, they had a map with all the Ku Klux Klan that are in the area. It was astounding.
Well, I mean, I went for 1 year. I went to camp in Zionsville, Indiana, which is one of the headquarters of the KKK.
Right.
It makes me great neighbors. All right, let's switch gears and find out what our friend Joshua has been up to. Okay. And I think we are chapter 15, correct?
I don't remember.
Does anybody need, I'll put up the text.
I think weren't we past 15? With all the names of all those places?
Well, you do it again and again.
It goes on for a chapter. Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, it keeps going on, actually.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. Were we at 15 or 6? I don't know where we were.
We were in 15. I don't think we kind of got on the side track, and I don't think we ever finished 15.
Okay.
Which is like us.
That's fine. Right. I think we're at verse 13 here.
13?
Yeah. Chapter 15, verse 13.
That makes sense. We were talking about Caleb, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
Oh, yeah, we're talking about Caleb. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Let's join in our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay. So, in accordance with the Lord's command, Joshua, Caleb, son of Yefuneh, was given a portion among the Judites, namely Kiryat Arba, that is Hebron. Arba was the father of Anak. Caleb dislodged from there the 3 Anakites. So which means like the giants, right? Oh, there's Eric again. Did we lose Eric? No, I see Eric, but okay. Now we have them twice. Okay. Oh, good. Okay. So, Caleb has this very, very powerful success militarily. He has a military success. Remember, he is quite old at this point. He is 85. Yeah, we learned verse 10 of chapter 14. He's 85 years old. Believe numbers, don't believe numbers. It doesn't much matter. It just means he's old. You know, he's quite advanced, but he has maintained, and he maintains himself, that he is fully in control and is powerful, and is as powerful as he was 40 years before. I don't know about any of you, but I don't think I'm quite as, I'm not in the same shape I was 40 years ago. I mean, I don't think I want to be what I was 40 years ago, but that's a whole other.
But he could have been like Jack LaLanne, who in his 90s was still towing tugboats with his teeth.
Right?
My mother loved Jack LaLanne.
I'm totally aging myself on that one, but still.
Yeah, I remember her watching on TV.
Oh, yeah, and I remember my grandfather doing his exercises.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Carly, do you know who Jack LaLanne is?
No.
Yeah.
It's okay.
I remember.
I remember.
Yeah.
He was like the first to do sort of exercise programs on TV.
Right.
Kind of like a Richard Simmons type.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, but no.
Earlier
He was a strong man. He was the kind of guy who would, he was a little tiny guy, but he'd lift 400 pounds over his head,
Or he had muscles, my good bulging muscles.
Oh, yeah. But he did it into his 90s. That was the really crazy part of it.
Yeah,
Maybe that's how he got to be in his 90s.
right, but it was really, he started really a genre of TV that, that I think more or less, Jane Fonda killed. There was remember this thing that had like the 20-minute workout that was on TV?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
5 more, 3 more.
And then once videotapes and whatever came out, that was the end of it, right? Because then you could do it on your own time. You didn't have to do it when it was scheduled, and then nobody wanted to watch the scheduled thing.
Or Winmore has it on their TV every day.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think he also had like a 45s, because I remember in grade school when we had gym class, there was one of the teachers played those 45s with him on it,
Telling you what to do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And then you'd watch the teacher do that, which he was.
Well, I think he actually started in radio, didn't he? Wasn't it a radio show before it went to TV? It may have been.
I don't know. I remember it's just Mr. Chevalier. I can remember all that. Going to gym class there and doing those exercises with Jack LaLanne.
Yeah.
So maybe Joshua was still in good shape at 85.
Caleb.
So where are we
Caleb, excuse
starting?
me, yeah.
Okay, so we're at verse 13 of chapter 15.
But we did 15 last, didn't we?
We never finished it. No, we
Right.
were stuck in the middle of it.
Yeah, we're sort of stuck on that. So we're just picking up there.
We did it. This poll.
No, I think Sue's right. I think
Name all these, yeah.
Yeah, I think Sue's right.
Did we finish it? Okay. I thought we
Yeah.
got bogged down in the middle on side conversation.
We did this whole thing about the daughter being given in marriage, and
Yeah, she got off her donkey, and then
Right, we did do that.
there's the reciting of the towns.
right, which you couldn't make me do if you tried.
Yeah. And then, in verse 16, even the portion that fell by lot to the Josephites, and we started talking about the
Yes.
things decided by lottery. So we even
Yeah.
got through there.
Good. So what follows is this whole of these towns, which further kind of give you this this sense of almost a desperate attempt to be clear about the geography. Right? They're really trying to. It's almost as if they're drawing these connecting, lines about the geography here. Why? Why are they so? I mean, it goes on for pages and pages.
I go with the retrojection hypothesis. They're speaking to a contemporary audience about something, about assimilation, or about who's in and who's out, or reminding people where we are and why we're here.
It's interesting though, if you look up when this book was written, it jumps all over the place. I mean, there's modern theories right now because of some new evidence. I don't remember what, say within the past 10, 20 years, where they're thinking this was written a different time period than they previously had thought. So,
I mean, the problem is that you date a book by the language you used in it. But if you try to retroject a text and you use older language, then you can, mess with the dating. So if you tried to recreate Shakespeare and you wrote in Shakespearean style, and 1,000 years later somebody dug it up, they'd think, oh, this is contemporary with Shakespeare.
Mm.
So dating these books is very, very hard. Because the way you get to being legitimate is that you get as close as you can back to the text of Torah, right? So the closer you can get to Torah, the more legitimate your arguments are. But let's say for argument's sake, that this is a temple period piece, and they are laying out for people the kind of boundaries and borders, and making sure that people understand that the reach of the Jewish nation goes to these areas. Why?
The story comes from earliest years when they have too much of lamb and everything. They need to have place where to feed them and get water. So they divide into the places so everybody knows his place. So they don't fight among themselves for the place where they put their stock and where they produce something. So everybody knows their place.
Okay, so everybody, it's much easier to say, okay, you guys live over there and we're over here and we're over there and we're over there, and stay there because that's what it told us to do in the sacred text.
Yes. Because if one have more stock and another less stock, they're gonna start fighting about territory, where is to feed. But knowing their place, they will not fight. They will do this according to the amount of the land they have, and they manage it.
Okay. And now go all the way to the end of chapter 15, verse 63. But the Judites could not dispossess the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem. So the Judites dwell with the Jebusites in Jerusalem to this day. So they couldn't get rid of them. So they figured out a way to live together.
Or the reality was the Jebusites were not dispossessed and they had to learn to live with them. So they're saying,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, it's very clear they couldn't get rid of them, so they had to learn to live with them. You know, I mean, which sort of points to Jerusalem being a very crossroads kind of geographic and important place, and continues to be, right? I mean, Jerusalem is the most hotly contested little piece of property in the world.
I think verse 63 is interesting in that it gives you a sense of time. That phrase, so the Judites dwell with the Jebusites in Jerusalem to this day, which indicates it's been so long that it's beyond memory, and it's just been happening a long time. So, and it gives a spin to that verse, which is we're recounting things that happened long ago.
Well, and I think it gives credence to that retrojection argument, because I wouldn't say to this day if I was writing it in a contemporary time frame, right?
Right.
I would say, you know, yesterday we couldn't beat the Jebusites, and so we have figured out a way to live with them. But
it still feels like at least to my reading, I'm curious what other people think, but it feels still highly exclusionary. They're here, but we wish they weren't.
oh, this is not a happy moment. This is not Canada, US.
Right.
This is, you know, I couldn't kill them, so I have to live with them.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's for sure. You know, the sense of they don't have another choice.
Right.
They'd like it to be something else, but
They're still here.
they're stuck. But why include that?
Because everyone's supposed to be destroyed, and right here they not destroyed for some reason. They don't describe why they was not destroyed. They just write they was not destroyed for some reason.
So they have to sort of explain if we're going with retrojection, right? So the question is, well, if you conquered the whole land, why are these Jebusites still here?
Right.
Well, you know, when we arrived, we couldn't get rid of them.
like a foretelling of the Palestinian issue. To live with it.
Well, it has its parallels, right?
I go with, I mean, especially given the long list of all the victories that precede it. It wasn't an undefeated season, and I think your explanation is right, which is, all right, so the book says we won everything, we conquered the land, but how come there are all these other people still here? So it was almost an undefeated season. We had like we didn't show up to play one day, and that's why they're still here. But so the Jebusites seem to me to be a stand-in for all of the people who are still someplace in all of these villages.
I mean, it could very well be, right? I mean, it's specific here to Jerusalem, but I think there's a sense there that says, well, you know, there may be some leftovers here.
Well, the same thing repeats itself in the next chapter, which
You read ahead?
I'm sorry, yes. You know, those Canaanites, we couldn't get rid of the Canaanites. They're still here.
Well, and right. And so if you look at chapter 16, which is very short, it begins, the portion that fell by lot to the Josephites, which shouldn't have gotten their own land anyway, because Joseph is not a tribe.
Right.
So that's an interesting phrase, right? Because there's no such thing as the tribe of Joseph. There's the two half tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim, half of which Manasseh ends up staying on the other side of the Jordan. So what does he mean by Josephites? I mean, we'd have to look up at the commentaries in terms of what they said, but it's interesting that Greg, does your book say anything?
Yeah, let me look. Right here. Well, it says the two tribes of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, were located in the center of the country, north of Judah and Benjamin, although half of Manasseh was east of the Jordan. Their territory, like Judah's, was allocated before that of the other tribes because the brothers Judah and Joseph had been leaders of the family, became future royalty would come from them. The Davidic dynasty from Judah and the kings of the breakaway 10 tribes from Ephraim. Rashi notes that the territory between Judah's northern border and Joseph's southern border later became the province of Benjamin.
So they don't really answer the question.
No, guess not.
No.
Guess not.
And I'm looking at the commentaries here on Sepharia, and they also don't really.
Right, they don't.
So, and I don't really know this commentary at all, but Mitzudat David says, in commenting on Livnei Yosef, which means the tribes of the people of Joseph, Hem Menashe ve'Ephraim v'natlu smuchim ze leze. So this is meaning that it's when Ephraim and Manasseh combined together, one and the other. Aval kol echad natal chazak lavad, but each of them kind of remained strong and independent. V'gam nachlatam mil'o kol ha'orech shel Eretz Yisrael, and each and every one of them sort of maintained their position in the land of Israel. Mimizrach, so from the east, Lama'avar to the west, Ukmo Nachlat Yehuda, just like Judah did. Just like the tribe of Judah goes from east to west. So they're saying that when the text says it's the Josephites, it means that there's an alliance between Manasseh and Ephraim, and one, Manasseh, although is living over here, used their forces to help the Ephraimites secure their area.
That makes sense.
But again, it's commentary. We don't know anything, right? I mean, but it is an interesting turn of phrase. And then it goes, it sort of gives us the whole geographic outlines. And then it further details it. The territory for the Ephraimites by their clans was as follows, and then we go through that. And then at the end, with verse 9, together with the towns marked off for the Ephraimites within the territory of the Manasshites, all those towns with their villages. However, they failed to dispossess the Canaanites who dwelt in Gezer. So the Canaanites remained in the midst of Ephraim, as is still the case, but they had to perform forced labor. You don't say.
Commentary.
Uh-huh. I'd say we've gone to the dogs, but you know. So there seems to be this kind of like hyperbole of we beat this and we beat that and we established ourselves in this place, in this place, in this place, and we have all of these towns. Yeah, except we have those little Canaanites over there, and we,
Right. Except
just when you but we have them there, but we make them work. So we punished them, even though we really couldn't beat them. Now, that's either a explanation of having this non-Israelite demographic still living with you, and so you have to explain it, right? Because it seems to be that's the pattern, right? You talk about all of the things that you've done, the things that you have accomplished, and then you acknowledge, oh, by the way, I didn't quite make, I didn't quite do it all.
And you know what? You know who's missing? God.
In what way?
God doesn't have anything to do with any of this, either with with like having conquered all of these places or having failed to conquer all these places. Compared to earlier Torah sessions, God says to Moses, don't worry, this is going to happen. I'll take care of things. Even earlier in Joshua, he says to Joshua, don't worry, I'll take care of things. And God hasn't shown up in a couple of chapters.
So what's going on?
Well, this is a military document. Like we have this, and you go there, and you go there. Nothing.
Because the first part of Joshua, Eric's right, the first part of Joshua reads much like Exodus, right?
Right.
The people crossed over. God prevented pursuers from following them or hurting them. Remember, there was this big, wall. They stopped the river flowing, right? That whole thing. And then, sort of once that is there, God sort of disappears.
Yeah.
What happened?
It doesn't disappear. He says, I'll be with you. But now you're adult. You have to figure this out on your own, like sort of thing.
Well, how about God is not a micromanager? This delineation of this tribe here, this tribe there is not his purview.
Yeah. Once the rockets are up, who cares where they come down? That's not my department.
But I'll tell you something. In different chapters, God does micromanage. So very inconsistent there.
Right?
Right.
Well, and some would say the lots are controlled by God too, how the lots come out.
Yeah.
Oh, that's Bupkis.
I said some.
There you
would
have
say.
it. No.
I think Eric's not buying.
And we're nowhere near Sodom and Gomorrah. What's Lot got to do with this anyway?
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out when was the last time we saw God.
Well, really at the beginning. I mean, time you hit,
We have the first 3 or 4 battles he's
I mean,
present.
really, it's like chapter 8 or 9. You know, in the first several battles, and God sort of talks to Joshua and says, you know, hold out your spear and all that. You know, and then in chapter 8, you know, Joshua builds the altar to God on Mount Ebal, just as Moses had commanded. And it's interesting because really the end of what appears to be God speaking to Joshua you have Joshua speaking to God, but God doesn't really respond. We don't, I'm just kind of skimming here, but we don't really have God. Yeah, I don't think so. The last part we have, which is interesting, you know, is this quote that the end of chapter 8, there was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua failed to read in the presence of the entire assembly of Israel, including the women, children, and the strangers who accompanied them.
That sounds like Torah to me.
Right, and that's really the you know, so meaning, and I think this is a significant shift, that God is no longer speaking to us through the prophet and is now speaking to us through the text.
Keep going. What does that mean?
Well, if you think about sort of the modern theology and ideas, God no longer speaks to us through a prophet. We no longer have prophecy. We no longer have individuals who bring God's message. God's message to us comes to us through the study of the text, right? Through our interpretations and our wrestling and ideas of text. That's how we get. That's how we derive God's messages to us.
This is a dumb question then. Don't we have later books called prophets?
No. I'm talking like today, right? This is how our
right. So you're saying this is the indicator that this.
Yes,
is
I think this is the beginning.
transitional.
You know, or maybe it's a sense that says God's done. God, you know, God gave the instructions. God gave the directions. God has given the ideas. Now you, Joshua, have to implement.
Yeah, exactly.
Do we have to admit it then that your mother is right?
I suppose.
Yeah, that the Liliana hypothesis is she's saying, okay, grow up.
There you go. Yeah, you know, and God said, "Look, I gave you the tools. I gave you the instruction book. Go."
Yeah. Okay, Liliana, you win.
So go into 17 here. So this is the person that felt a lot by tribe of Manasseh, for he was Joseph's firstborn, since Machir, the firstborn of Manasseh, the father of blah, 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 blah. Now assignments were made to the remaining Menashites by their clans, the descendants of Abizar, Chelek, Yisrael, Shechem, Chifar, whatever. Those were the male descendants of Manasseh, son of Joseph, by their clans. Now, Tzlofchad, and here we go back to Tzlofchad, who we had the daughters of Tzlofchad. We had two episodes with them. Remember, the daughters of Tzlofchad first come to Moses and say, look, our dad has no male heirs. but we deserve a portion. And Moses says, oh, well, I don't know, I got to talk to the boss. And so Moses speaks to God, and God says, yes, in fact, they're deserving. And then they kind of backpedal a little bit, and they say, well, they can have it, but they can't marry out. They have to stay within. And they sort of, take it away. But now we have, Tzlofchad, son of Hafir, son of Gilad, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, had no sons, but only daughters. The names of his daughters were Milcha, Noah, Hogla, Milcah, and Tizra. They appeared before the priest Eleazar, Joshua, son of Nun, and the chieftains, saying, the Lord commanded Moses to grant us the portion among our male kinsmen. They're calling in their promise, right? They're calling it in. They're saying, look, Moses promised us this. So in accordance with the Lord's instructions, they were granted a portion among their father's kinsmen. 10 districts fell to Manasseh, apart from the lands of Gilad and Bashan, which are across the Jordan. So that's on the other side, right? Manasseh's daughters inherited a portion of these together with his sons, while the land of Gilad was assigned to the rest of Manasseh's descendants. So we're sort of splitting it up, right? But was Manasseh supposed to get land within the land of Israel?
No, he was on the other side.
Yeah. So what's happening here? How is he getting this? Why is he getting this?
Is this another case of the text coming up with an explanation for, we've got people sitting in the land that wasn't of their tribe. So we'll blame it on the women who don't really belong to any tribe. And that's sort of how it happens, just like we have Canaanites and we have Jebusites and we have people who don't really fit what we said was going to happen.
So it's another case of justification through retrojection.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. We've got a reality on the ground. So we're going to write this text that gives you the explanation as a retrojection of this is what happened, so that I can explain what's in effect today.
I guess, yeah, I'm realizing what a terrible biblical theologian I am, right? It's just, it's all written to explain what happened rather than the other way around.
Okay, so now, so get beyond that, right? So, okay, so that's how, that may be so, but what is it teaching us? Why is it here?
Okay.
Right? I mean, because that's, it's fine to say, okay, you have all these hypotheses and this documentary theories and all of that's great. But in the end, you still have this as the Bible, right? So it hasn't been printed year after year, decade after decade, generation after generation, just because it's a retrojected text.
Okay, so my interpretation is women still matter.
Talk about the women, these daughters, the names of these daughters. I know at least 3 of them are used today in the
Exactly.
Orthodox community. I don't know about the other 2, but
They're
for
all
sure.
used. They're all
Which doesn't happen because they mention other names and they don't use them. To me, it's just, whoa.
Out of
Why are they
curiosity,
mentioned in such detail?
yeah. Liliana, which 3 do you know of? What you've heard in the Orthodox community? I'm just curious.
Sorry. I gotta turn this off.
I used to teach in a conservative day school, and I've had female students named Noah.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah. I mean, most of these are used.
Yeah.
Machla, Noah, Hogla, Milcah, Tizra. I mean, they're all
They're used in
used.
Israel. They're Israeli names. Yeah.
Yeah, remember, post or when the early Zionists really tried to, kind of leave behind the Yiddish and the old country, right? They tried to leave that behind. They all took on classic Hebrew names. So, I can't think of examples, but Shlomo Goldstein takes on or whatever takes on Shlomo Ben Zahav, which a lot of them just translated it into Hebrew, son of gold, that kind of thing. David Ben Gurion, I mean, he's born in Eastern Europe. He starts as something else. Yehuda Amichai also. All of these early Zionists all took on different names. And in fact, it still happens. So a lot of people, when they move to Israel, in the rabbi world, we call it the conservative rabbi two-step. So you grow up as Brian Cohen, and all of a sudden you're Baruch. Or, it's Rob, and you move to Israel and you're suddenly Ruvain. It was that sense of kind of leaving behind, and really lots of cultures do it, right? I mean, the African American culture does this all the time. This is their slave name, right? And they try to they try to come up with their own. They try to reclaim that indigenous tradition.
I call Amos Shlomo all the time. No, I'm kidding.
Right. So, but you've given him a classic Hebrew name, so
yeah,
Amos is Amos. My kids all have what we three of my kids have what we call ambidextrous names. So Noah, Sarah, Nathan are all both right. And then with Yael, we just like. That's her middle name is Rebecca, yes, but but she's the only one that has like a real like Hebrew name, which only causes her problems when she goes to Starbucks because nobody can get it right. So mostly people do Yale. Whatever. Okay. So what's interesting is that you have a lot of these kind of these sort of promissory notes that get called in, right? I mean, you have which is interesting because what is it you're really saying when you're having these kind of notes that or these promises that keep coming up?
Well, I think they make good on their promise.
Who makes good?
Joshua or the people.
And ultimately it's God, right? I mean, ultimately this is really, God's not present in the same way, but there's a pretty clear message here, I think, that says, okay, God's making good here. God promised that these daughters would get their portion. Here we go. Right? And how is God's promise being fulfilled? Joshua read the book. Right?
I think back to that first episode with Joshua when a tribe came by and faked poverty, and once they were found out, Joshua kept his promise and honored that promise.
He's stuck, right? He's got it, because a promise is an oath. It's something that you have. You haven't actually promised the people. You've promised God that you would do this. So the promise actually the oath is between you and God. It may affect a third party, but the agreement is actually between you and God, which is an interesting sort of dynamic, because you really think that if I borrow money from you, the agreement is between the two of us, right? Well, sort of. The transactions between the two of us, but the promise to pay it back is between me and God. So if I break that promise, my retribution comes from God, not necessarily you. All right. So then we've got this whole list of places, boundaries, and blah, blah, blah. It's okay that we're not reading all that stuff, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Just, I'm not trying to shortchange it, but really it doesn't,
Doesn't matter.
I mean, what would be interesting would be to have some kind, and it doesn't exist, but what would be interesting would be to see it on a map.
Yeah.
But it's impossible because we don't have any idea of where these places really were. I mean, most of them anyway.
Last verse, it says the hill country, that part shall be yours. It's a forest, but you will clear it and possess it. It's interesting. I don't know if it's.
And line 14 is interesting.
Okay, so let's go to line 12 because it starts it. The Manassites could not possess the inhabitants of the towns, and the Canaanites stubbornly remained in this region. Right, so you can have the wilderness, you can conquer the trees, but we're holding on to the towns. Thank you very much. When the Israelites became stronger, they imposed tribute on the Canaanites, but they did not dispossess them. So they taxed them, but they couldn't really get rid of them. The Josephites complained to Joshua, saying, "Why have you assigned as our portion a single allotment and a single district, seeing that we are a numerous people whom the Lord has blessed so greatly?" And Joshua's response, "If you are a numerous people," Joshua answered them, "go up to the forest country and clear an area for yourselves there in the territory of the Perizzites and the Rephaim, seeing that you are cramped in the hill country of Ephraim." In other words, okay, well, if you want to, if you think you need more space and you need to expand, you got empty land over there, go build a town. Go west, young man.
Neighbors round.
"The hill country is not enough for us," the Josephites replied. "And all the Canaanites who live in the valley have iron chariots, both those in Bet Sha'an and its dependencies, and those in the valley of Jezreel." But Joshua, and probably, the concept of a chariot, indicates that this is timed a little bit funny, but anyway. "But Joshua declared to the house of Joseph, to Ephraim and Manasseh, you are indeed a numerous people, possessed of great strength. You shall not have one allotment only. The hill country shall be yours as well. True, it is forest land, but you will clear it and possess it to its farthest limits. And you shall also dispossess the Canaanites, even though they have iron chariots, and even though they're strong."
Use chariot.
They're saying we want more land, and Joshua is saying, okay, go work for it. Right?
It is strange that he does not go say we go together and dispossess, because they're supposed to fight together. And right here, he tells them, go and do this by himself. So it is strange. They're supposed to fight together and clear territory together, but here he forgot about this.
So Joshua is saying, okay, look, we are not mobilizing the army here. You want this? You're so numerous. Sei gesund. Have at it. Is that Carly or Luba?
Not me. It did sound like, no.
I can't wait. I can't wait to have little Amos running back and forth. Is he reading yet? What?
Oh, yes. Advanced calculus.
Excellent. Good.
Yeah, it's interesting that promise that Manasseh had promised to help conquer the land. That promise only went one way. He helped them, but they didn't help him. So
right.
Yeah, but they could be angry about that. Like, you didn't want to join us, so you're on your own here.
But they did join them. They did agree.
Yeah, but because they had to. Maybe. I don't know.
Well, they definitely joined in the fight.
Right.
Why is it that Joshua is so reluctant to engage here?
Because God promised the land on the other side of the Jordan, not the east side, wasn't it?
Well,
Yeah,
to Manasseh, yeah.
But the tribe was split in half, so I assume this is the half that went into the land. Part of the tribe is still in the eastern side of the Jordan, and this is the half that went into the western side. So,
Okay.
but my question to Rabbi though is the reason Joshua was so reluctant to get them together is that at this point they're dispersed and they're on their own, and there isn't any real unity left.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know, obviously, but we can surmise that this was a unified force for that first level of conquest. And then after that, everybody has to take care of their own little part of the world.
He has to be kind of strategic about it because you can only expend so many resources to conquer so much before you're spread so thin. Then something really happens to the central territory, and you're like, crap, everybody else is out doing something else, and we're just going to end up back where we were because we're going to lose it.
So how confident are you in Joshua's promise? Oh, don't worry, you'll dispossess the Canaanites, even though they have iron chariots. You're on your own.
Right. Have fun storming the castle.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's real. I think that, Joshua is sort of sending them out, good luck, boys.
It's an interesting leadership tactic. It doesn't win. I don't know. I'd be distraught if I came to the leader and said, look, I really need new land. We have a huge tribe. I really need your support. And he says, no, you can do it.
Well, but is it analogous to teaching them how to fish?
Mhm.
He says, okay, you are indeed a numerous people, and you definitely have great strength. You can do this.
Mhm.
So is it this process of, this process of nation building in which each province, each tribe has to become self-sufficient and self-directive in terms of protecting and caring for the needs of its own residents, right? It's decentralizing the responsibility of this. I think that's part of it.
Good point.
And I think this is Joshua's pep talk, right? You came to me and told me how numerous and how powerful you all are. Great. You're numerous and powerful, so you can do this. You don't need me.
It's good parenting.
Yeah. It's like the kid who writes the teacher an essay about why he can't write the essay. You're very articulate. You've explained your things. You've developed your strength. Go. Because if each of the tribes takes ownership and responsibility, then the whole federation is protected. If we're depending on Joshua to come running in and help you every time there's a problem, then that becomes unworkable, basically.
It reminds me of the saying, God helps those who help themselves. Just, you got to work for it.
Yeah. And I think that the last part of that chapter, that even though they have these iron chariots, meaning that even though they have sophisticated and very powerful defenses, you can still do this. You have the strength and power to do it. So, don't always look to the centralized leadership. You have to look to what you can do first.
Which brings us to the next chapter is 18. And so legally you're an adult at 18, or maybe you can drink. It's the drinking age in Canada. So that's a good mnemonic for next week we'll be on chapter 18. Okay.
Good. All right.
Aye.
All right, everybody. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Take care.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Have a good one.